Hundreds of insurrectionists have been charged with federal crimes after they broke into the Capitol. 5 people died that day. And one of the more visible individuals that you probably saw in video footage and also on this show as we covered him was the QAnon Shaman, who has an interesting legal defense that I actually 100% believe. Now the question is this enough of a defense to get him off easy considering the crime that he committed? So here we're talking about the guy that you saw in horns, again referred to as the QAnon Shaman, and his lawyer, Albert Watkins, was on CNN to share what the defense is. Why don't you hear it for yourselves and see if you're buying it?
That propaganda was going on nonstop, not since November, but since prior to Trump assuming the office. Trump's tweets, his social media exploitation, what he said day in, day out that we all permitted included untruths, misrepresentations, out and out lies, not every now and then, every day. Not once a day, multiple times daily. You couple that with a protracted period with COVID, social distancing, the absence of humanity around a lot of people who get their news from TikTok and from social media and from this internet coffee klatch. And it was a mess. It was a mess that created an environment on January 6th, which was not 1 month in the making. For people like Jake, for millions of Americans, they truly did hang on every word of their president, our president, the person that we permitted day in, day out to speak to us in ways and in fashions that simply weren't true.
So the defense here is that Donald Trump incited what we noticed what we experienced on January 6th. And that is exactly what Donald Trump is now facing an impeachment trial on. So I agree with the statements there. I don't know if that's enough to let Jacob Chansley off easy. That's the client, that's the so-called QAnon Shaman. And I don't know, I'm curious what you think, Francesca.
I mean, it's a point that we need to make over and over and over and over again. I mean, I hope that Jamie Raskin takes that into the Senate trial tomorrow. That exact quote from this guy's lawyer, who's basically like, yeah, my client was deluded into thinking that the election was stolen. Now, whether or not this guy, who's already been transferred to another prison because there wasn't organic food in the one that he was in, a right that is always extended to the many Black and brown people who are locked up. Irony intended, but we should absolutely remember, I don't have a soft spot for the insurrectionists, but if your president kept on repeating the lie to you that the election was stolen and you have to defend the republic and democracy, then yeah, I guess storming the Capitol would kind of make sense to you in your warped brain that let's be real, he's right. Years in the making. The joke when Trump was elected was, our first and last president. As if we didn't all see that there was nothing that was gonna prevent Trump from clinging to power. And and so just knowing just how also unprepared we were for the day of, and we haven't gotten to the bottom of that investigation, is also incredibly and still unsettling.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And to, I guess, buttress the point that Al Watkins, the lawyer, was making in that interview, there has been some analysis done by USA Today to see just how much Donald Trump's words translated to certain discourse on social media like Parler, for instance. So one quick note though, remember at the end of Trump's speech that day, he said that he was going to join the insurrectionists in the march to the Capitol. Yeah. And he didn't do that. He turned around and went back to the White House, right? So when he said that, understand that it gives this feel of legitimacy to what these insurrectionists did that day. They felt that they had the backing of the president of the United States, and of course they didn't. Same goes for Rudy Giuliani, who said that there needed to be trial by combat, and he turned around and did not go.
They didn't insofar as they weren't there. They had their support, but they were not gonna put their lives on the line.
Exactly.
No, they're gonna turn right around.
Exactly. So going back to the USA Today analysis that I was referring to, after Trump said to march, one Parler user wrote, quote, "Time to fight, civil war is upon us." As another said, quote, "We are going to have a civil war, get ready." The analysis by USA Today also found that the use of the phrase civil war increased nearly 4 times during Trump's speech, as it was used on 156 separate occasions while he spoke, right? So the point here is that Donald Trump's words, as we had been arguing for 4 years straight, matter. And there's elaboration on that in the next clip. Let's hear more of what the lawyer Al Watkins has to say.
Does he now know that he was being lied to?
So this is a process. The answer is yes. The process, though, is not something that Jake is going through alone. The process of unwinding from years of Trump, years of lies.
Make it sound like he's being deprogrammed from a cult.
Well, I've likened the entire thing to 1978 and Jim Jones down in Guyana. This is very real for these people. And these are our brothers and our sisters and our families. And they're millions of Americans. The unwinding process is not going to be complete at the end of this week whenever this impeachment trial is concluded. It's not going to be over by the time of the next election. It's a process that's going to require patience and compassion.
It's going to require patience and compassion because these are millions of people, Francesca, who believe Trump. They're our brothers, our sisters, our family members, our friends. Patience and compassion. What say you?
Okay, first of all, let's just be real. Like, he knows that he's got to represent his client the best he can, and he's got to represent a certain amount of remorse if his client is going to get off with a lesser sentence. And I'm sure daily there's a debate between him and his QAnon shaman about the reality of reality or his unreality. So that's a little bit of dance that his lawyer is doing there. But again, going back to which we should never forget, the double standard of how these insurrectionists are being treated, and which has everything to do with the fact that a large majority of them are white, are male, and hey, 14% of the 150 people who've been arrested, this is as of last week, are former or current military. So these are scary and embedded folks who are openly, right? So this is absolutely a cultural thing. And I'm of the belief that we don't need a second war on terror to go after them, but we actually need to utilize the laws that are already on the books, DHS that is already going after extremism, but actually empower them to go after white extremists, go after people who might be in the military. And you know how you do that, or in the police force, you know how you do that? You do what the Black Lives Matter movement has asked for, which is an actual review, which is actual consequences when someone, actually acts out or has an instance of police brutality or brutalizes somebody. This is all connected. Anyway,
yes.
But of course, no. I mean, a compassion. I don't know, Anna.
No, you make so many good points, Francesca, and I'm so grateful that you are making those points. Because look, in order for the country to heal, we've been hearing a lot about healing, right? The issues regarding what divides us need to be addressed, right? So white supremacy within our military, white supremacy within our local police departments. I mean, you're absolutely right. We do not need a war on terror in the United States, and we can very easily use the laws we have now and actually apply them equally to people, right? So if you have people who are trying to overthrow the government, they should be prosecuted, especially if they put violence behind that ideology. And that is what we experienced on January 6th. At the same time, though, there are some new regulations that I personally would like to see, but they're not geared at extra surveillance or beefing up the security state. I would like to see the fairness doctrine back in our media. So back before the Reagan administration, so from about the 1940s to the 1980s, Reagan's the one who repealed the fairness doctrine. There were FCC regulations that essentially said the core of these regulations indicated that in order to get a broadcast license, and to be clear, the majority of people consume their news through television. In order to get that broadcast license, you have to prioritize the public's interest before profits, right? And what that did was ensure that incredibly important topics that serve the public's interest would get appropriate coverage. And how would they be appropriate? Well, the regulations also stipulated that if you are talking about some sort of controversial political issue, you must give time to the opposing view, so the audience is really fully informed on what the situation is. It doesn't mean that you treat it as both sides are neutral. As you guys know, I absolutely hate that. But that's not what you would see in the news to the same extent that you're seeing it now. What you would see in the news is, let's say, Rudy Giuliani, for instance, goes on Fox and, or no, here's a better example, which was given by my co-host during the weekend show that I did for Jacobin. When Joyanne Reid had that body language expert on to criticize Bernie Sanders and his body language, if the fairness doctrine were still a thing, if those regulations still existed, Bernie Sanders would have the ability to go on there and defend himself, right? So it's just something that was actually working, that was repealed by Reagan because conservatives hated it. And they made this argument that it violated the First Amendment, but it didn't. What it actually did was create more speech by giving audiences and listeners, because this applied to radio as well, different points of view in any given broadcast. And so I think that would have been, if you take that and you modernize it for what we're dealing with today, I think that could actually be really effective. And you should watch my segment on that. I did it for weekends.
Absolutely,
but anyway.
And the same goes for like, look, these guys are all planning this stuff on Facebook, and we know Facebook is a monopoly. And once again, talk about having like moneyed interests at heart. They love that stuff. Oh my God, they love referring new extremist groups to people to join so that they'll just stay on the platform. So again, it extends to all these areas. I don't think you can ever fully get rid of misinformation or conspiracy theory or hate on the internet, but there are absolutely tools that can be used to minimize that, and breaking up these big companies is also one of those ways. And I know we're doing this on YouTube, and I don't mean to bite the corporate hand.
Thanks for watching the Young Turks, really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.